Okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you. Welcome to CU Data Week. We really appreciate you attending our seminars. We do have sessions for the rest of the week every day at 12 p.m. So tomorrow we have advanced data visualization. On Wednesday, we have advanced data management in SAS, talking about macros. And then on Thursday, we have how to create a RedCap database that statisticians will love. And then on Friday, we have our office hours, same time at 12 p.m. MST. And so you can come to office hours and ask any questions from last week or this week. I'm going to put in the chat the link to sign up for any additional. You can go to our website. And at the bottom, you could go and say that you want to register for one of our other courses or register for our Friday office hours. You can come and ask any questions from today, from last week, anything like that. Please stay till the end. I'm going to put in a link for our seminar survey. So this is an attendance survey. We want to hear your feedback on what you thought about this seminar and then what you want to see from us in the future. For every seminar that you attend, except for the office hours, you'll be entered into a raffle to win a $75 gift card to Amazon. And so if you've attended all 8, your name is in the raffle 8 times. So please complete that so you can be added to the raffle. I'm also putting in the link to the Dropbox. So this has access to all of the materials for this week. So you can go there to download, the code for this seminar and anything else like that. And that is it. We have Grace here, and she's going to talk about advanced reporting in R. Thank you, Grace.
Thanks. Thanks for the introduction, Samantha. Okay. So for my plan for this seminar, just as a quick, orientation, is I have a big, long R Markdown document that I'm going to walk through that will cover pretty much all the things that I've learned since I started learning R and that I use semi-frequently in reporting. And that has been uploaded to the OneDrive. I think it's OneDrive or Dropbox, I think, that Samantha shared.
Yeah, for all the students, we did Dropbox because last year OneDrive wasn't working
Oh,
as
great.
well.
I did make a tiny edit this morning. It's like an extra link. So I don't know if I have to move it to the Dropbox too, but I'll point them out in the talk today. So I'm going to share my screen and then we'll just walk through my R Markdown together. So this is the general outline I have. Also, I don't know how much R experience people have, but my R will probably look a little bit different than yours because I switched my console and my environment. So if you're looking at this and wondering why it looks different than probably what you downloaded, my console's in the upper right and my environment's in the lower left. So that's probably what's going on. But so this is my general flow. I have basically like a short section of I called it orientation, but definitions that you'll need to know that I won't spend too much time on, but I wrote it out just because I wanted you guys to be able to read it in the case that you pull this up in a month or something, or try to remember what the heck we were talking about today. So hopefully that will serve as kind of more of a legacy thing. I'll briefly go through them just for definition's sake, but otherwise I have some syntax stuff and then some examples on tabling packages that I think work really well with all the different R Markdown outputs. And then outputting, saving some stuff and some tips and tricks with HTML specific reporting, and then outputting to Word specifically because it's a little bit goofy compared to the other outputs. Okay. So the first thing that you will need to know is what makes an R Markdown document different from an R script. And that is the ability to combine traditional text, like what you would write in a Microsoft Word document, and code, which is super, super helpful when you're writing reports and you want to actually interpret things and present alongside tables and graphs and images. It sounds quite simple, but not most documents can't do that. Our scripts are really great for cleaning and data heavy things, but if you want to combine it with any sort of language or any sort of like text to accompany it, which is really great for like in my world, we're always providing interpretations alongside our tables and things. Um, this makes your life a lot easier. So you separate your code from your language using chunks. So this is all written in just like how you would be typing in Microsoft Word, like your traditional text. Once you want to initiate a code chunk, you use the three ticks and then an R, and then you can name it if you want. And then you'll notice the background turns a little like a gray shade. And that's when you know that you're now switching from just writing in paragraph form to like now we're working in like code language. Um, yeah, so these like all the gray chunks you can run, you can report this in your output. So the YAML, this is the little bit of code at the top that I have highlighted now. This is what tells your report what the like what it's going to look like. If you want like what the output you want, what coloring you want, you can name it. Like the default is to include, I believe, the title, author, and date, and then you'll have to specify what output you want. So R Markdowns, if you were to create a new file, like a new R Markdown, it will ask you the title, your author, this is my name, and then the date will automatically input. And it'll ask you what output you want, if you want HTML, if you want it to be output to PDF, and if you want it to be output to Word. The defaults, typically, I think most people will use HTML just because in my opinion, it's the most flexible. Um, PDFs are not as flexible and it doesn't have the editing functions that words do. Like if you've ever used Microsoft Word before, which I'm sure you have, like the ability to highlight and comment things. That is something that it's quite hard to do in PDF. So I think the most common output is HTML, but I also have I use Word a lot just because of that reviewing option. It's really nice to be able to highlight and edit in a format that's friendly to version tracking and things like that. So, and you can always switch between the output later on. So this report, you'll see I have these are the settings for when it outputs to HTML, and these are the settings when it outputs to Word. I'm going to comment the Word output out for right now, just because I have a section on that at the very end. So for now, I'm just going to be outputting to HTML. So this is telling me that when I knit this, it's going to output to an HTML. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. It's called knitting. It's going to compile this whole document into a report. And then I can show you some of the why some things are blue here and like why we have some pound signs. So this is on the right, you'll see it switch to the render tab and you'll see it's slowly working its way through knitting the whole thing. It'll say it's 50% of the way through. These are all the names for the chunks. So I've started, like I included names for each of the chunks just to kind of remind myself what I wanted to include in each of the little code chunks. So if you were ever running into an error, that's a good way to kind of see what part is going wrong. So by default, when you knit it, it will pop up in your viewer panel. If you want to make it bigger, you can just hit this tab here in the upper left, and then it will open in your default internet browser. And when I say that HTML is the most flexible, what I mean is that for things like this, it has a table of contents. You can like toggle around. You'll notice that this is output into a bullet point list, which I've indented with or created with the dashes. But the thing that's a little bit tricky is that you have to have an empty line and a tab set. For some reason, that will ruin that's required that's your way to indicate that you're making a bullet point list. And you'll notice that you can also like put things in italics or bold using like asterisks. One asterisk is italics and two is for bold. Another reason why the R Markdown document is so great is if you ever are encountering any sort of equation, you can use any of the language that if you've ever used LaTeX or anything like that. It's very flexible with equations. It makes things very easy to read. Um, and this is like, if you know LaTeX, it's great. You can just use that language. If you don't, and you're like, what the heck are you talking about? You can actually, this is a recent update to R Studio in general, is that you can toggle to this visual tab, and there's some like buttons that will help you input this the fraction or the equations in a way that makes sense to R. And what if you go here, like if you like wanted to put like a sigma or something, you can go insert Unicode and find all the like fancy characters. Like if you needed to find a summation, you can find it there and it will put the code in. So it's just one of those things that you don't have to remember. It's nice to know that the kind of helper tools exist here. Um, the visual tab, while I'm talking about this, so traditionally the source tab is what you would have used. Like historically, since R Markdown was around, the source tab is like what you'll find most useful in creating the document. The visual tab is a recent add, I think in the last year or two, very recently in terms of coding. And this is just kind of like a soft compile, like it's not rendering the full document, but it is a nice way to check if like your list is compiling into a list without having to knit the whole thing. And it's also a nice way to like, if you wanted to input an image, you can, rather than, these are things that like I always forget and I have to Google every single time of how do I input an image that's been saved on my local computer. And these are like, it's just really great. You can add, like, I think I have an image. Yeah, you can just navigate and it will automatically insert insert it in the visual tab, and then it will update the code like properly on the coding tab. So this is just a nice way for you to like, it's a little bit of a handicap or a reminder of some things that you probably don't use that often, but might use eventually. So I'm going to remove this because I don't really want to include that. Okay. Um, yeah, so I think I've talked about most of this. The inline coding, the other thing that makes our markdowns or dynamic reporting really great is that you are able to run little bits of code within text. And you'll notice I did that for the date. So for example, whenever I render this, it will automatically run this tiny little line of code of sysdate is this function where if I run this in my console, it will just print today's date. So if I run this today, it will compile this and it'll print today's date. When I run this tomorrow, it'll print tomorrow's date. And if I ran it last week, it would say like January, whatever. So this is a great way to automatically have kind of a version of control of your reporting documents over or rendering or knitting the document over and over again. It's really nice to be able to see like, well, if your collaborator sends something back to you, you can see what date it was created and if there has been updates since then. You can also use this for things like you've created summaries of like you wanted to print the total number of people in your analysis and you wanted to make sure that you were presenting it correctly, you could use like simple lines of code, like using the number, like the counts, like n row of like this toy data set of empty cars. You can use inline coding to have it automatically print how many observations there were. So it's kind of nice in terms of reproducibility, just to make sure that you're not doing any like typos or having any fat finger moments. And it's always something that is like up to date based on the data that you're using. Um, yeah, so the other thing that you'll notice as I switch between the HTML report and the R Markdown document is that all of the headings I've been using are using, I guess, pound symbols or hashtags, depending on how old you are. The more the fewer number of pound symbols you have, the larger the heading will be. So this is a nice way, and you can actually see this in action. All of these are like the first level of headings. If I wanted to indent something and have it be a little bit smaller of a heading, so for example, I have these headings that we'll get through later, that's 5.1. These are all 2 pound symbols. So if I click to this will have two. This is one. So if you want something like the more indents you want, you have to add more pound symbols or hashtags. And it will automatically, like I have it set up so it numbers each section. You can remove that and it can just have the different sizes of type of headings and things like that. But that's how you kind of would create the sections. And it's nice because it will automatically like reflect in your headings. Okay, so I think that's all I want to go through in terms of like definitions. If there are any comments or questions, feel free to speak up before I move on. Um, Otherwise, I'm going to move on to more chunk settings and syntax. Going once, going twice. Okay. Yeah, okay. So specific chunk settings. I have a comment if you'd like to name a chunk. You can put a comma here. You don't have to. This is the only chunk call that does not require a preceding comma. It doesn't really matter, but everything else, just know that if you don't have a comma separating them, you will run into errors. And that is a very easy typo to have that will break your whole report. They don't have to be named. So I could easily just have it like this and it would still run. Um, it's sometimes nice to name your chunks just to kind of have remind yourself of what the theme is, or if you have chunks that are similar, but if you wanted to say this chunk is for the full cohort and this chunk of data is for like just those that are over 18 or something like that. Sometimes it's nice to kind of remind yourself what was going on. It's not required by any means, but sometimes it's nice for reproducibility. This is the default settings for a chunk is to repeat the line of code. So I'm going to scroll down. The default settings is to echo the code used and actually I'm going to show you to echo the line of code used and then print the output. So this will, when you knit this, it will print, like it'll copy literally this line of code, and it will print the two outputs, like the sum of 2 and 2, and then it will print hello as directed. Oftentimes people don't care about seeing the code part of things. So there are some like syntax calls that I've listed here. The 4 main ones that I think are the most important are listed here. So include will determine whether or not the code and results are included at all. So this is if it's great to be when you want something to be run like in the background but not printed in your report. This is a great time to use include equals false. It will run it, but it won't produce in your report. So this would be great for something like I always use it when I'm reading in package or loading packages, because it will come with messages. It will come with like notes if you run like your data cleaning. Oftentimes you don't care about the messages that are associated with that because you're so familiar with it. Or if you just are maybe like working on something and you're not ready for a collaborator to see it, like this is a great time to switch include equals to false. Echo will is whether or not the code is included. So for example, this is on the right, you can see this is copying the code that it's required, or the code that I've run, and it's producing the output. If I don't want to see the code, I would have to switch echo to false. And if I only want to see the output, which is typically what most reports want, you want like the final output of things. And then message and warning are kind of self-explanatory, but these are about messages and like warnings that are prompted by code. So for like warnings are more serious than a message. So a message might say like this package was loaded, it's dependent on this other package, so we loaded that package too. So it's something that's not critical, but it is like noting to you that something else was done that you didn't specify. You can turn messages to be false if you're like, yeah, I know, I don't care about that. That's fine. Warnings are a bit more serious. So I would be a little bit more cautious about turning warnings to false. I have typically seen warnings equals false or warnings pop up when like you have missing values for something that you're trying to plot or something that's like a value of infinity. These are things where your graph may be running and looks good, but your warning message will say like 4 observations were removed because of missing values or like non-numeric values, I think is what it says when it's like a value of infinity or something like that. So um, this is how you would turn it off. I would tread with caution just for reasons like that. Like usually when you have situations that require a warning, it's usually better to go back and actually fix what's going on and kind of see what so there's usually something goofy going on with your data. But yeah, so these can be set for each chunk individually. So you'll have noticed earlier, this is like, you can just list them here, echo equals false, echo equals true. Um, that is a little bit tedious if you have like, I don't even know how many chunks I have in this document, but it's annoying to go through and have to define it for each chunk specifically. So you can also set the global options in this way. So for example, I always run this line of code at the top of all of my R Markdowns because none of my collaborators care about seeing the code. They care about seeing the results. So this is a way you can set the default settings to say echo equals true, or like I want this to be true, or if I want to switch this to false, then all the code will hide or not be produced. As a side note, you'll notice that I'm able to toggle between showing the code or not, and this is something that I've specified in the YAML. The code folding equals show. If I didn't want that to be shown, I would switch this to hide. You can also change the theme here. You can number your settings between yes or no. There's a whole world of like themes. Like you'll notice I have like the background is black and the comments are blue and all that stuff. This can all be changed in the YAML. So again, this is really where anything that's like kind of aesthetic-y on the HTML documents, this is where you would change that. And I've listed most of them here, just a bunch of stuff that I've come across just because it's easier to turn it off and delete it. But by no means are you required to make all of these, all these edits for every HTML document you do. This will run even if it's just like this. So, but for the purposes of, taking this home and trying to manipulate it later, I wanted to include all those settings. Okay, so we've gone through chunk settings. Yeah, I've included a couple links here. This is the link I added this morning, so it may not be in the version if you've downloaded this locally. This may not be in the version you have that you're following along with. I've added a link on specifically HTML output. There's a whole bunch of stuff about that goes into more detail that's even like more advanced than this. I have found most of that to be like very rarely used in my experience. So I'm already 20 minutes in. So I'm gonna just leave that for you in case you end up wanting to review that and move on. Otherwise, I think most of the settings in this is like totally fine. I've also included a link for the different HTML themes, which I'm not going to spend time on. Okay, so next I have 3 tabling packages, which I am not going to spend a ton of time on just because I think that that's probably closer associated with a different data week session. I just decided to choose some examples for the 3 packages I use most. So ggplot is used for plotting, and then ggsummary is used for table creation, and then I personally use flextable for like table aesthetics. I've included this because these 3 packages work with all of the output that is possible in an R Markdown. Sometimes, like I know, for example, cable is a very popular package for R Markdowns, but does not play with Word like at all unless something has been changed in the last like year or 6 months. So I wanted to provide a way to make tables and a way to like change some of the aesthetics that is flexible and hopefully pretty straightforward, and like you can use potentially in a future project. So GT Summary is a package. If you haven't downloaded it before, you'll have to install this package like this and do install packages and do GT Summary. Um, I'm not going to do this because I've already installed it. Um, if you've installed it ever before, you only have to install it once and then it'll be on your machine. You would just need to load it like this and do library and then GT Summary call. Um, but these are all the functions that I used often. Like I love GT Summary. So and I'm gonna pull back my viewer tab so you can see what I'm looking at. GT Summary. So the first table, actually I'm gonna make this bigger. The first table is a very simple, I'm using this data set trial, which is downloaded as toy data on the backside of GT Summary. So if you've loaded GT Summary, you will be able to access the trial data. This is what it looks like. It has treatment, it has age as marker, some stage, grade. It's all made up stuff, but it's enough that you can kind of see what's going on with the tables and kind of how it's being used. So I start every project with the demographics table. This is how I would start. I use the pipe. That's what this symbol is called, the percent greater than percent. This is called a pipe. This just means I'm going to use this data set. I'm going to use like it's a chronologic layout of what steps are going to be used first to last. So you always start with your data set. You would pipe. This is a select function. I want to include these three variables. So age, grade, and response. And this is the function I care about, table summary. And it's made it into this really, I think, nice table. It will automatically prompt, or in any missing values, it will prompt as unknown. And it will automatically do median and like quartile 1 and quartile 3 for any continuous variables, and then the number of people that fall into that category and the percent for any categorical ones. So for age, this will be the median and then IQR, and then this is going to be grade. There's some 68 people in groups grades 1 and 2, and then 64 in grade 3, and this is a percent of 200. So this is a really fast way to make a good table. It is also very flexible. So I've added a couple iterations of like all the different things you can change. So I've slowly added on to this. So this one, you'll notice I've stratified it by treatment. I've changed the label of patient age to say patient age, to be more specific. I've also said I want all continuous variables to be mean and standard deviation as opposed to the median and IQR. And then I changed the number of digits that I care about, like the significant digits. So now you'll see the age has a decimal, which probably didn't make the most sense, um, but yeah, there's just another option you're able to change. Yeah, so just another way you can change the missing. You can say, no, I know that they're missing data. I don't care about that. Feel free to exclude it. This is an example of like a 2 level, like you want to include both the median and the min and the max. This is how you would go about doing that. The first string, the first part and the quotes is what's going to be in the first row. And then you'll put a quote like a comma, and then your string will include the second row of statistics. Min and max, you can change this to be mean, standard deviation. So it's really a flexible package once you get to know how to use it. Like you can really build on top of it and make some pretty complex tables quite quickly. So this is the same call. GT Summary also has like companion functions. So you can add an overall column, which adds this column here. You can add a header that says you can change the name from characteristics, which I think it said before, to variables. You can bold the labels and italicize levels. Again, this is just a bunch of functions that I have used before that I found very helpful. You'll notice this is a really great function. It's called add p, and this will test the the differences of proportion between drug A and drug B. I will say this is another thing that you should need to be cautious about using because it makes assumptions and you may have to change. This is where your statistical knowledge will be more important than the defaults in the function. It will default to using Wilcoxon rank sum test for continuous variables and chi-square test for continuous variables. Wilcoxon rank sum test does not assume normality. And then, so if you are in a situation where you think that's more appropriate to assume normality, you will have to go in and change it to use a t-test. And then you'll have to also specify if you think your variants are equal or not. So I don't know. I felt conflicted on confusing this because I feel like it's one of those function that is almost too easy and will allow people to run tests that maybe they shouldn't be. But I did include it, but just know that you will have to double check the tests that are being used in the scenario that maybe your assumptions aren't the same. And I saw a question in the chat, what does the new page do before some of the code chunks? Yeah, so this is a great example or a good question. Thanks for asking it. The new page is not as useful for HTML. You'll see its purpose when I get to Microsoft Word. Um, and but the short answer is that when you're outputting to Microsoft Word, will start a new page for each table. Otherwise, the tables will sometimes get caught between, page 1 and page 2, and then it'll kind of be harder to read. And I'll point this out to you when I output to Microsoft Word. But yeah, so this is a good point though, is that so for this particular document, I have it outputting to both HTML and Word. Um, some of the things will work in HTML and some of them will work in Word. And this is a great question because this is one of the functions that you'll see throughout here that this is one of the reasons why Word is a little bit more annoying, is that you have to be mindful of the page gaps between tables. Like the HTML is a continuous scrolling situation. So yeah, okay. Okay, so I've included some other functions here. I'm going to kind of breeze through this because I don't think it's the purpose of this, but I did want to point them out to you. There's a table regression. If you fit a model, you can feed the model results to the table regression function. It will put that in a table for you. And then table, how do you specify the statistical test for the p-value? Yeah, this is a good question. So I have to look this up every single time. So if you ever are like me and can't remember this, if you just type in your console question mark and the function you're trying to use, it will pop up with all the documentation that's been downloaded. So this is the function I'm looking at, right? So if I want to, it will tell you all of the different inputs. So this is where you would change. You would go through and you would say all continuous, switch to t-test, or you would list a variable name specifically and say like age, test with t-test. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, they will have some examples for you. So this is I think what you care about. And I should have included this in the document, but test everything with a t-test, or you can change the argument. So you want to assume that the equal variance is not true. So this is just I guess a tip just in general for any package. You can always do that question mark and then search the function name. Super helpful. R is required for any package that's on CRAN to have the documentation. So please utilize this. But yeah, anyways, this is how you would do it. You would change in the function where it says add p, you would just add like a test everything equals t-test. This will, I think, produce an error because we have some categorical tests that won't run when it's a t-test because we would need it to chi-square. Maybe it will. It just won't produce the p-value. And you'll notice it updated in the footnote. So now it's saying it's using Welch's two-sample t-test, which is the t-test that does not assume normality, or doesn't assume equal variance. Sorry, normality is Wilcoxon rank sum. Cool. Yeah, another good question. Thank you. Yeah, UV regression is very similar to table regression, table underscore regression. But this will run a univariate model for each variable that's included. So this it's a little bit you have to be careful when interpreting this just because at first glance this might some people may misread this as being a multivariate model, but this is one model being run for age, one model being run for grade, and one model being run for, in this case, T stage. So in this case, I'm specifying the method, the outcome, and then method R's or any other input variable or input variables that I care about um, for my specified method. So for example, when you're using a GLM, you have to specify the family call. And in this case, my outcome is binomial. So I'm going to specify the family equals binomial. Anything that is log odds, people usually care about the non-log odds output. So they care about the exponentiated outputs, easier to interpret. So you can specify and say, yes, exponentiate this automatically, which turns it into an odds ratio as opposed to a log odds ratio. And then you can specify these are the variables I want to include. And then you can also merge them. So if you run two different models, you can stack them like this. It's quite easy actually. You just include them in a list, and it will add the odds ratios for both the models. You can also stack them side to side, or I guess it's merge them, I suppose is the verb they use, table merge. And then you can add headers that are associated with the particular models. So this one is a odds ratio, so it's a GLM, and this one is time to death, so it's a survival model. So this is great. Two different methods of fitting a same outcome, but it's a nice way to compare or present models alongside each other. Yeah, and then table strata. This is if you ever want to stratify by two variables. So you'll notice I have drug A and drug B for the treatment like 1, 2, and 3. So this is once I have this is my full, it's still the same. I think it's 200 people in this cohort or something close to that. Yeah, 200. It's still the 200 people, but they're split between all, what is this, 2, 4, 6 columns. So this is treatment 1, drug A, drug B, treatment 2, drug A, drug B. And this is a great way to just, I guess, stratify by two different variables. It's even more flexible than that. So, yeah, and again, you can combine with table merge or table stack. So I guess if I had specified this to be table stack, it would have made it like a really long table. Generally, I think people prefer table merge because it's easier to read a wide table than a long table, but to each their own. There's always a collaborator that manages to prove me wrong. So, yeah, okay. So that's a very fast rundown of GT summary. Flex table, I have presented I've included this purely because again, when you're outputting Microsoft Word, an issue that you may have is when your table gets too wide, it will run off the margins of the side of the report. So converting to a flex table and then fitting, there's this function that it's auto fit. And then I'll just show you. So flex table. So this is these two calls are what will make the flex table is really great at fitting the table you're fitting or the table you're running to the margins of a Word document. There is a bit of a bug. This auto fit function is what is provided in the flex table package, but it does not always work. So this is a function that I think I've pulled from Stack Overflow and have used for the last like 3 years. I provided it to you just because it's saved me a ton of time and hassle. You can specify the page width. I think 6.5 is the traditional width of what your Microsoft Word is in inches. If you want it to have bigger or wider margins, you can just change the page width with that call and do PG width equals like 4, and it will automatically override that, but it will default to the widest margins possible on a Microsoft Word document. So yeah, and this is really great. Like for example, that the stratified table above, this is something that I'm almost positive would run off the margins of a Microsoft Word document if it was not converted to a flex table and then used autofit. So would highly recommend. Flex table also has some Um, oh, I've also showed you can convert any GT summary object to a flex table just so that the aesthetics match. Um, you also can create, like sometimes you don't need to make a GT summary object, and this is how you would convert just your average data frame to a G flex table object too, if you wanted the aesthetics to match and just kind of be a cohesive document overall. Um, and then flex table has a ton of like themes, and you can highlight certain like lines and colors and set captions and stuff. Um, I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I think it's beyond the scope of this particular hour, but just know that if you want to change like highlight a cell or something, that flex table is probably the best way to do that. There are built-in themes and stuff. You can color the background to be gray, all that stuff, all that good stuff. But yeah, probably not worth your time for most projects. Um, ggplot, I have included, I think, a single graph just because I wanted to show how to edit the dimensions using or in a code chunk. So this is, I think Samantha said that there's a ggplot seminar tomorrow. So I would, or no, oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, cool. So I would, if you want to learn more about ggplot, I would go there. I'm not gonna explain what this is doing just because, again, it's beyond the scope of this presentation, but just take my word for it that um, this is what my plot looks like. And then if I wanted to output this with, make things not look squished or like, because sometimes the default will look kind of goofy and you want to just spread it out. You can adjust the figure dimensions up here. I have found that like something within 6'4" or 6'6" is a great like ratio depending on if your graph is like longer or wider. I think it's with width and then height. And this is it's in inches, I believe, but the ratio can be adjusted and it will scale it to the output you've selected. Sometimes, and I will say this is where Microsoft Word is not too great, is that it will decrease the quality of the image when it's outputting to any, I think really any, whether it's HTML, PDF, or Word. If you want a high res version of your graph, this is how I'd recommend doing it. There's this output or this output or this function called ggsave. You can save your file this way, and this is what makes it high res. This is like the dots per inch or something. And this is just 900 is always what I use for high res images. This is great once you've decided on like this is the graph we're going to use in our publication. I want it to be as high quality as possible. This is when you would export it and save it. But yeah, just so this is kind of a con of reporting is that I have never had any output, and you also want to like save like computer space. You don't need super high quality images for all your whole document, but if you try to just like save image as here, it will not be the best quality. So what I'd recommend is, or my general workflow, I guess, is outputting everything on the like just whatever quality is defaulted for reviewing purposes and graph creation and editing and all that stuff. And then once you've decided on like this is the color scheme we're going to be using, this is finalized. If we like this graph, then just saving it locally, and then you can have your high quality version or like export it separately. Okay. So one of the things that I think is the coolest about outputting the HTML is the ability to do tab sets. So this is what a tab set is. You can toggle between the plots and the tables, and you can add even more. I just didn't have much to present to you all. You can add language in each tab, and you can specify whether, so this is what I mean when I say HTMLs are like super, super flexible. And the code to do that is really quite simple. You would just have your full header with whatever many, like using the pound, and then anything you want to be a tab in that has to be indented one extra of whatever it is. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be one, like it could be like this and it would still work. So you would have your section header with one pound, and then each of your tabs with like n+1 pound symbols. And then you would just include whatever you wanted to have presented in each tab below it with typical code chunks. And then once you go back to having more or like less, sorry, having less pound symbols, that's when the tab sets will end. But kind of relating back to the first question, this is something that will not output to Word. So you'll notice when I get there in a moment that this is just, it will just default to printing it like top and bottom. So this is something that is only possible to do in HTML. And it's really nice. Like I know a lot of the metabolomics people in our department like to do this because they just have so much data to get through. And sometimes it's hard to parse through like just tons and tons of data. So this is a nice way to have like several that kind of condense the report you're looking through. Yeah, okay. So now I'm going to switch to outputting to Word unless anybody has any more questions. I know I just blew through a lot, but otherwise I will kind of pivot to outputting to Word as opposed to HTML. Okay, cool. So if I ever want to change the output of what I'm doing to Word, I would go back to my YAML, and I'm going to uncomment this. So I'm going to run this and it will show you. You'll notice I'm using a reference document. This is what I think is kind of cool about outputting to Word is that you can specify the like aesthetics you want to be output, like to match the document that you're knitting to. So I'm going to show you, it's going to take a second to output. You don't need to have a reference doc. I think if you just remove this, it will default. It will just use all the default settings for a Word document. I did include, I think, the my styling document that I use in alongside with the R Markdown and the Dropbox. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, you'll notice it's a little bit slower knitting, and of course you have to have Microsoft Word on your computer to do this. So it popped up on my other monitor. So this is what it looks like. You'll notice it looks very, very similar. Like if I share this with my, like do side by side, get rid of that. So this outputs to Word. It looks mostly the same, like in terms of content. You'll notice the like aesthetics are a little bit different. Like the background is black here and they're white here. That's because of the YAML call. Yet again, everything boils down to being whether like something that's been called in the YAML. This is what a default GT summary table looks like, which are fine. I don't think they're particularly groundbreaking. But if you want to see an example of what the flex table, like this is why I just like flex table. I think it looks a little bit cleaner and nicer and more professional. But yeah, the content is the same, but I'm going to show you what happens with the tab set because this is something, it'll just print it top and bottom. So this is something that like, it won't throw an error, but it will just not work. So I guess it's nice, like if you were in a scenario like this where you had it or you wanted to be able to output to either or both. But know that you don't, only some, like you can only do tab sets for HTML. So what else did I make? I did also include a resource on custom Word templates. It's a little bit annoying, so I'm going to show you what my Word template looks like. So I'm going to close this. I called it styles template. It doesn't look fancy, but if you wanted to edit the aesthetics of this, you would have to go to the styles pane and say I wanted to make the title print in like red font or something like this. I would have to go to, sorry, that was kind of fast. If you highlight any text, it will know, like it's kind of hard to see, I'm sure, when you're screen sharing, but it will tell you what text or style is currently being used. So this is heading 1, which makes sense. That's the first heading I have in my document. I can do the drop down and go to modify style and change anything I want here. So I can change it to be center aligned. I can change the font text or the font here. I can make it print in different colors. If you want to change anything with the paragraph or anything else, it's probably found down here. And it will kind of summarize what the like it's being used. So it's saying font size 18, it's using this color accent, all capitals, all this stuff. This is how you would have to go about changing everything. Um, yeah, so I'm gonna save this and then knit it again, and then we can see what has changed. The only annoying thing about the styling document is that it has to have been created by an R Markdown file. So it's a little bit like full circle-ish. Like you have to have create and like use R Markdown to create a style template, and then in your next R Markdown you can read it in. It's a little bit confusing that way. So I have just provided one that I have used that you should be able just to download locally and use that has been created by Word before or by an R Markdown file on my computer. So my goal is for you to be able to just edit what I've given you as opposed to having to try to create something from scratch. And then this will, yeah, so now you'll notice this is in red, this is in purple. I guess I didn't change any font or anything else, but this is a great way to like how to change the aesthetics of your Word documents. Yeah, and then I guess if you wanted to make any edits, you can just go from there. But and this is like a big lift up front, but then this is also great for any report you've created ever. Like I've been using the same styling template for like 3 years. So this is something that probably requires a lot of editing up front, but once you kind of have a style you like and coloring you like and whatever, this will like I guess have a big payoff, or you don't have to, hopefully you won't have to edit it super often. Um yeah, I think that was everything I wanted to get through. I know we have only 7 minutes left, but does anybody have any questions about anything I went over, or want me to go back and talk about something more, or anything of that nature?
Can I ask a quick question? Thank you so much for that
Yeah,
presentation.
of
That's
course.
really helpful. So in your workflow, do you write everything into R Markdown and not R script?
Yeah,
Or
actually, so I do a combination of both. And what I should have done is included an example of this. So I personally like R scripts for like all of my data cleaning and management.
okay,
So what I will do is I'll create an R script for all my cleaning, and then there's this call called source where it will run a line of code or run a script in the background.
okay.
So my code will look something like this, and I'll be like 01 data management dot R. Um, so this is what it would look like. I don't have a script titled that, but what I would do is I would make sure the R script is saved in the same working directory. And then this would read it in, run all my cleaning in the background, and then anything that I want my collaborators to see, I would do in an R Markdown because I'm able to add interpretations alongside. And I can actually show you. Maybe I'll pull up a report of mine. Um,
Thank you. And then while you're pulling that up, can I ask one last question? How do you
yeah,
compare GT summary to table one, which is what Colin introduced last week?
yeah. So table one, they're very similar. I am not sure if table one can be converted to flex table. Honestly, both table one and GT summary are very similar. I personally love GT summary, especially because it works well with like modeling results too. Table one is a little bit limited in that sense. I'm not sure you can do that. And are you referring to table like the number one, or table ONE? I know that
O
there's
N E.
ONE.
No, no, sorry. The one he had was one with the, yeah, with the
Yeah,
value.
I
I think
want to
you're right, though. It
say,
is more limited.
yeah, I want to, because I initially used table one. That was my introduction to coding as well. It's really great. I have a special place in my heart for that. But I do think that you can't output to Word with it, I want to say.
Yeah,
So
that has been tricky.
it depends on if like what you're out. If you're outputting HTML, it's totally fine. If you want to do anything with Microsoft Word related, that's kind of where things get a little bit tricky.
Okay, thank
Um, yeah. So let me show.
Something you can do that I've done, if like something in a like a table doesn't do well with knitting to Word, you can sometimes, this doesn't work all the time, sometimes you could just actually copy and paste the table from HTML into a Word document, and sometimes it works really great and sometimes it doesn't. The good thing about R is that there are so many different types of like table functions that you can use, and even like um the same with what's it called, plots. So
Mhm. Yeah, the one thing I will say is that if you do use GT Summary and Flex Table, you are able to edit the table in Word too. Like this will be in, like this isn't an image, which is what happens with a lot of tabling packages. You're able to delete, like if for some reason I decided I, like maybe I don't care about this model anymore, rather than having to go back and change everything, I can actually just delete the entire column. So it gives your collaborators a little bit more freedom. So maybe that's a pro, maybe that's a con. I don't know, but it is like
That's all
flexible.
super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, lots of flexibility. But yeah, so
oh,
I think oh, you go.
oh, sorry, I was just gonna say the survey link is in the chat. Sorry, go Grace.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna quickly pull up. This is like an example of a report I have. Traditionally, what I would do is I like to include like an introduction and a little bit of a summary of my data cleaning and like the methods I used. So this is kind of what I'm like working towards when I'm sending something to a collaborator, and then I'll have like a list of all my tables and like modeling and stuff like that. Um, but then once I'm actually in, like this is a project I have, like this is like a source, like an example of a file that I'm running, and my data management will be like all in the background, and then I can comment that into Obliterin. But yeah, any other questions? No?
Thank you so much. That was so great.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you everybody for attending and asking some good questions and learning more about R. I'm always happy to help.